All right, we're going to get started. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for tonight's presentation. I'm Sarah Gurecki, and I'm the Chief Publishing Officer at the Colorado Mountain Club. This evening we have CMC Press author Annalise Grueter, who's going to be talking about her new book, Colorado Alpine Trail Runs. This book features 45 spectacular running routes that vary in length from 40 to 30 miles, so options from easy to challenging. And every route reaches an elevation over 11,500 feet and includes at least one alpine pass, lake, or summit. Annalise is going to tell us about some of her favorite trail runs and also give us some tips for how to get started in the trail running sport. So Annalise's book is going to be on sale tonight during the presentation, 20% off on our website, cmcpress.org, which I will put in the chat. And anyone who buys a copy of the book during tonight's presentation on our website will be entered into a drawing for this free Colorado Mountain Club buff, which is really colorful and nice. And I will mail it to you. I'll announce the winner at the end of the talk. And now for a little bit of Zoom etiquette. I'm sure you're all quite familiar with using Zoom by now, but here are a few friendly reminders. First of all, please keep your microphones muted and please keep your cameras off during the talk. That actually helps us with internet bandwidth during the talk. But feel free to turn your cameras back on for the Q&A at the end of the night, and we'll have a little bit of an interactive Q&A when Annalise is done telling us about the book. And just as a reminder, this session is being recorded. This presentation will be on our YouTube channel later in the week, so pretty soon. And please ask all of your questions. You can put your questions in the chat box, and then we'll take questions at the end of the talk. And you can also turn your camera back on at that time, and we'll just do a Q&A at the end. And now to introduce tonight's speaker. So Annalise Grueter is a marathoner, an ultramarathoner, and an avid hiker. She lives in Western Colorado and loves exploring mountains all over the world, particularly through mountain running and ski mountaineering. Over to you, Annalise.
All right. Hi, everybody. So a little bit more about me. I've been running and exploring the mountains my entire life, and was introduced to mountain running when I was still a teenager. It was a seed that was planted and took probably better part of a decade to sprout. But I'm really excited to share with all of you about this and about what the book entails, and looking forward to hearing what questions you have and seeing how it has resonated with folks, especially this time of year. It's the best time to get out in the mountains and be experiencing the high country. So a little bit about the book itself. I've covered 6 of the major subranges of the Colorado Rockies. So the Front Range of Colorado, which is the furthest right section of this map here. There are 9 routes of highlights outside of primarily Boulder, Golden, and Colorado Springs. Then the red dots on the map are in the Summit County area. It's more than just Summit County, but we've got several different sub-ranges that are stacked pretty close together. So 4 highlights from that section of the mountains. Then in the Elk Range, which is in yellow there, we've got 9 routes, and the Elk Range has kind of become a mountain running mecca in recent years. I live in Carbondale, Colorado now, and like Trail Runner magazine is based here. There are quite a few really impressive endurance athletes whose feats I can only aspire to come anywhere close to in this area. Then down in the southwest corner of the state in the San Juans, we've got 8 routes scattered throughout there. Over in the southeastern corner of the mountains is the Sangre de Cristo Range, which is particularly dramatic, and so has some really great opportunities for sky running, which I'll get into a few slides from now. And then that light green up in between the yellow and the red is the Swatch Range, which a lot of folks will recognize due to the fact that that's where the Leadville 100 is hosted. And some of those routes are near that ultra course, while others are a little more off the beaten path and technically some local secrets that I'm giving up. So hopefully folks enjoy the routes that I've included in the book. I won't be talking through all of them, but I will be mentioning a few highlights at the end. All right. So how are the routes rated in the book? I have blatantly stolen ski difficulty ratings. So they are ranked beginner, intermediate, difficult, and most difficult. And in the book, in the checklists and the like at a glance sections, we've put it using the symbols to make it really easy to just pick that up. The green circle is for beginner. They're recommended for folks that are just getting into alpine running, even if you're just getting into trail running and are mostly a hiker, haven't really run much. Those are going to be the best ones to start with. Intermediate are a little bit more difficult, usually because of elevation, but they're not really that technical. They're not going to be in super rocky or exposed terrain. Then difficult, these are rockier trails. Some of them involve sections of off-trail navigation. Some of them have large amounts of vertical gain, and then others are a bit more exposed. So you're on slopes where you're not going to die if you fall, but you're going to fall and tumble a little bit further if you were to trip. And then the most difficult, these are the most technical routes in the book. Some of them are the longest routes in the book. They're not necessarily both, but they are going to be longer runs, more marathon length runs. Some of the terrain will involve scrambling and a little bit of climbing. One of the few that does tick both the long and technical box is the 10-mile traverse, which is one of the classic mountain runs in Colorado, but it is also very difficult. So if you are new to mountain running, put that last on your list once you've checked off the rest of the routes and gotten comfortable. Okay, so what is alpine trail running? Trail running, most people are familiar with. It is running not on pavement, on a dirt trail, on a dirt road, and it's very similar to your typical road running, but you're going to have more ups and downs in the trail. You're actually going to develop more ankle strength because you are on less graded terrain. And it's also a really great way to access flow state, aka being totally present, being in the moment, and not having your mind elsewhere, thinking about like what you need to get at the grocery store or what went wrong at work that day or like any other obligations you have. You're just there in the moment. Mountain running and sky running are subcategories of trail running. They are officially registered sports. Mountain running is basically any sort of high elevation, longer distance trail running. So that can be above tree line. It isn't necessarily. It's very popular in the Western United States. So Colorado, California, Washington, Idaho, areas like that. It's also got a following in New Mexico. And then it's also super, super popular in Europe and then certain parts of Asia. People may remember some headlines about an ultra race in China over the winter. Sky running is a more extreme subcategory of the two, and it is defined as race courses or routes that have more than 6,000 vertical gain in the set route. And then it also is very characterized as having extreme courses where athletes are either scrambling or running, traversing across very steep side slopes. These tend to pop up in a lot of running commercials these days because it's very awe-inspiring. If you recognize the name Kilian Jornet, he basically founded the sport. And there are a couple routes that do fit into that category in terms of like sections of the trail. I don't think I have more than 2 routes in this book that have more than 6,000 vertical gain over the course of the trail, but we do have some routes that'll give you a taste of the dramatic views of sky running. So how do you get into trail running if you are a hiker, if you are a road runner, if you are not used to being on these high elevation trails, if you are not used to being at high elevation? First thing is you want to have the right things on your feet. If you're used to road running and you don't have trail shoes, you should buy trail shoes, but don't go crazy with it. Don't buy some like super snazzy looking shoe that is nothing like your road shoe. You want to buy trail shoes that fit very similarly to your road shoes, that are something you rely on, like your typical brand. Just go for the trail version of what you're used to. That will help to keep you injury free, including avoiding blisters and all of the things that runners don't like to have happen to their feet. If you prefer shoes with a lot of underfoot cushion, you should stick with that. If you prefer shoes that don't have a ton of cushion or more on the minimalist side of things, stick with that. Don't make the dramatic change because that's a great way to set yourself up for injury. And then elevation is really important. If you already do a lot of hiking at high elevation, you don't have to do as much in terms of elevation preparation. You'll want to focus more on running and getting comfortable with running mileage. But if you are more of a runner and you live at a lower elevation, like in the Front Range, if you're living in Denver at 5,000 feet, you should gradually increase the elevation of your runs. So go up to Boulder, do some runs where you're getting up to 6,000, 7,000 feet. If you are up in the high country and you live at 7,000 or 8,000 feet, then work on getting up to 9,000, 10,000, and don't just immediately throw yourself onto a route where you're starting at 12,000 feet, because your lungs will not know what hit them unless you are a superhuman, and then you should go get a physical done so they can figure out what makes you so awesome. Another thing that a lot of us runners can often overlook: don't forget about core strength, leg strength, muscle care. Yoga and foam rolling are really important. They help to prevent injury, and they also make it that much easier to go on these epic adventures. So you're not just doing cardio all the time. Give yourself a base to work from and have your gym rat moments as well as going and exploring the great outdoors. Once you are up in the mountains, power hiking is 100% okay. A lot of folks have a bit of a confrontation with this concept, but in the ultra running community, the widely known joke is that you are ultra walking. If you are going uphill and you cannot maintain a stable heart rate or a normal breathing pattern while using a running gait, switch to hiking. You'll be able to conserve more energy and quite possibly move faster if you switch to a hiking gait and do something that you can sustain instead of just wasting yourself trying to maintain a running gait. Then once you get to the top, you can take a deep breath, take some photos, take a couple extra swigs of water, and then run down and really tap into that flow state and feel the exhilaration of being in these gorgeous spaces. Being above tree line, electrolytes and hydration are even more important than they are at lower elevations. And I think we're probably all feeling that right now, given that we're in the middle of a heat wave. Don't just be drinking water. You also need to be taking in salts and minerals. If you have a headache, water alone is not going to fix it. So especially when you're training at lower elevations, it's great to test out different types of electrolyte mixes, drink mixes, to make sure that they agree with your stomach, even in those more like extreme environments. And then once you have something that your stomach likes that you can get down your throat at like 8,000 feet or 10,000 feet, then you know that you've got something you can rely on at a higher elevation. And then packing is really interesting with alpine running because you are essentially straddling the two different camps of mountaineering. There is the expedition style, which is essentially be fully prepared, have absolutely everything. Hardcore expedition style hikers are often joked about and called the kitchen sink because they are lacking nothing. They're not going to be caught unaware by any kind of circumstance. And then there are the ultralight camp, which are carrying as little as they possibly can. They are deliberately setting themselves up to move fast, but they're also sacrificing some things that could help them in certain situations. With running, you want to make sure that you have the 10 essentials, you have layers, you have a headlamp, you have what you need to stay hydrated and fed, but you also want to do it in a way that you're not carrying more than 5 to 10 pounds on your back. So when you're first starting out, it's great to do shorter runs with less mileage, because that way you can get used to what you're comfortable carrying and running with weight on your back as opposed to without anything. But also you can make that transition gradually and figure out what you're comfortable having and not having. For reference, I've included a couple photos here. The first photo on the left-hand side is how I packed for my very first run of the 4-pass loop in the Elk Range, which is about a marathon distance effort over 4 passes that are about 12,500 feet. And I really didn't know what I was getting myself into. I have been a dedicated hiker, and yes, I've run since I was a teenager, but I had a free weekend and a good forecast, and I decided to push my body. And you can get away with that kind of thing when you're 23 years old. That said, I did cover all of the essentials. So I had a physical map for navigation. I had quite a few layers. The bright blue jacket there is a raincoat. Then the magenta one is probably one of my favorite pieces of gear that I own. It is a Patagonia Houdini wind jacket. It is water resistant and it is ultra light. It weighs almost nothing and it can pack into a very small space. If you're looking for something to take into the high country, I highly recommend that you look for a wind jacket like that one. It's amazing. I can't say enough good things about it. Then a headlamp, a multi-tool. Multi-tools are not required, but for longer runs, I do actually recommend bringing that in case something on your pack breaks and you need to MacGyver some sort of fix to it. Same thing with bandanas. They can be really handy if you need to like come up with a quick fix for something on your pack, or if you trip and scrape your knee and want to clean it off with some water real quick. And then the biggest change that I've made since that run is I have switched away from fanny packs. Fanny packs can be great for shorter distance runs, but for most people, they will loosen up as the miles pass by. And it's not that much fun to be running with 5 to 10 pounds thumping on your lower back. So I would recommend instead a running pack, which a bunch of different brands make. And you can get anywhere from like a 3-liter volume pack to a 10 or 15-liter one if you want. But they have some very ingenious pockets for you to stuff soft bottles and food and all the things you need in there. Most of the other pieces of what I bring with me have stayed relatively the same. I would say that 2 of the big changes I have made is I do carry a bottle of ibuprofen with me, just in case. I am not a huge ibuprofen person myself, but if you roll an ankle and you are 6 miles into the backcountry, as long as bone's not showing, the easiest way to get out is to get yourself out. So that is some very basic treatment. But I would also recommend, if you don't have one, investing in a Garmin or a Spot device. Basically, even if you have no cell service, you can set this Spot device and it will show search and rescue folks exactly where you are. If you do get very, very injured, like if you tripped and you did break something, then that's a really great safety precaution in case something goes way off the rails. The thing I love about trail running and alpine running is that it is a much lower risk way to experience the backcountry than a lot of other mountaineering pursuits. But it doesn't hurt to have a backup plan. Then the other big change that I've made is that I get a lot more of my calories through drinking now. Basically, once I have a full bottle that is treated water, I will put in an electrolyte packet that has some added carbs and minerals to it. And that not only saves weight, it also is a lot easier on your stomach when you're going for those really long miles. And I'm going to pause here for a moment and check the chat. If anybody has questions about packing right now, feel free to raise your virtual hand and ask. I can answer these questions at the end as well, but if you would like to ask one now, then I can address it before moving on to more route specific and other safety details. All right, so eating while running, I did mention this, but it's really good to test this on lower elevation runs or the shorter runs in the book, because a lot of folks will struggle with appetite at higher elevations. And then also a lot of people do tend to be less inclined to eat when they are doing something that is more physical exertion like running. So you want to make sure that you are setting yourself up to eat something that's not going to make you throw it right back up. So some folks go 100% sugar-based and they're just doing gels and gummies. Literally, like I know people who will just eat peachy rings and gummy bears. The dangerous thing with that is if that's all you're eating, your stomach may start to get a little agitated from all of that sugar without anything else to balance it. So a couple tricks you can do is before your run, eat a meal with a good amount of fat and protein in it. Not right before your run, obviously, but an hour or two beforehand. But then also, if you're going longer distance, having some sort of protein bar or food with fat in it can be really helpful. One of my controversial favorites is they do sell packets of olives, which gets you some protein, gets you some fat, gets you some salt. I know that's not for everyone. Some people hate olives, but it is a good way to get some of those essentials in there. Some folks will do like packets of potato chips or plantain chips. I also know people that go fully like homemade food, and they'll make up a bunch of rice and then make rice balls with like honey in them or with like seaweed nori added to it, so that they've got a blend of the rice and like coconut oil for fat and then some salt or sugar added in there. There are all kinds of different things you do. Essentially, you want to be covering the bases of sugar and carbs, fat, protein, and salt. And then the most important piece is, will you want to eat it and will it stay down? Let's see. Yes, so the clothing pictured in the second picture, I'll go from left to right. I've got a pair of running shorts. I personally prefer to wear compression shorts with some close pockets, and then a sports bra and a polypro shirt. I highly recommend either polypro or merino for both upper and lower layers, because cotton is going to get wet and stay wet, which can be nice on very hot summer days, but if it gets cold and there are dramatic temperature changes, it's not the best. I do like to always have a spare pair of socks if I'm doing anything longer than like 5 miles. So I've got 2 pairs of socks in there. Again, for summertime, you're probably going to want something more lightweight. For autumn, you might want something a bit more midweight to keep you warm. Some folks like to do long socks that go all the way up your calves to just below your knees for compression. I do generally do that for my longer runs, but for shorter ones, I'll stick to something around the ankle. I've got a headband, a sun buff, which is essentially a lightweight neck gaiter like the one that is going to be a reward for whoever is buying the book during this presentation. Then bottle of ibuprofen, bandana, 6-liter pack under those things, the Houdini wind jacket, and then I've got 3 soft bottles there. If I'm going on a very, very long run and I feel like carrying the extra weight, I will also put a 1.5 to 2 liter water bladder in my pack. And then on the right-hand side of the photo, I have an ultralight rain jacket. If you opt for that, you can basically do either or with the rain jacket or the wind jacket, because both are water resistant. Obviously, the rain jacket is a little bit more water resistant. And then some calories and electrolytes. I've got 2 different kinds laid out in this photo, both of which are brands that work well for me, for my stomach. A long sleeve sun shirt, which also helps if it is a slightly lower temperature. I'll throw that on as a mid layer between my t-shirt and my wind jacket. And then for colder mornings, and it's good to have just in case anyway, especially if your hands get cold, a pair of lightweight gloves The ones pictured are the same gloves that I use when I'm cross-country skiing because they aren't too big, but they also are going to keep my hands warm enough when I'm moving and exerting a lot of energy. Slideshow really wants to take us on to leave no trace. All right, so there are no further questions about the packing, then I will move on to leave no trace. And I do have this on the slide. Obviously, shoes aren't pictured. Shoes, you want to stick with what works best for you. Sunscreen's not pictured, but it's very important. If you are going on a long run, I would recommend taking a small bottle to reapply on your face, if nothing else. A running hat can also be useful. And then Aquamira water treatment. There are a number of different ways to treat your water when you're in the backcountry. Some folks like to use ultraviolet light sticks. Others have the Solomon attachment to their bottle where it's filtering as they drink it. I prefer Aquamira water drops for two reasons. One, it does give the water a consistent taste once it's been treated. So you're not going to have to worry about like some streams tasting super fresh and some of them tasting kind of like silty or whatever. The Aquamira flavor kind of mitigates that and evens it all out. But it also gives me an excuse to pause for 5 minutes to let the chemicals activate. And then I can also take a short break to fill up on calories or adjust my shoes while that is happening. All right, so leave no trace. It's very important anytime you're in the backcountry. There are 7 pillars of it. Plan ahead and prepare, we just covered. But there are several other important points to make sure you're bearing in mind when you're in the backcountry. So one of those is travel on durable surfaces. And in Colorado Alpine Trail runs, I cover a number of different types of routes. Some of them are very, very popular trails for hiking and for running. And so on those trails, you will sometimes find what's called trail threading, which means that when a bunch of people have been on the same part of the trail at the same time, they will branch off of the trail, and eventually it starts to wear down and you have multiple trails spreading out across the alpine slopes, which is not great for the ecosystem. This also happens when a trail system is muddy. Generally, don't recommend going on trails at all when they're muddy. Mountain bikers are very familiar with this. But if you are on trails when they're muddy, just get your shoes muddy. It's better for the ecosystem and it's not the end of the world. You can hose your shoes off when you get home. If you are off trail, and there are several routes with off trail sections, you want to do the exact opposite of staying on the single track. Instead, what you want to do if you are in a group is to spread out across the terrain, across the alpine meadows that you are going over, because it's very delicate flora in these alpine ecosystems. And so if a bunch of pairs of feet are treading over the exact same sections of moss and alpine flowers and other plants, they're going to break down, and then that's going to deteriorate into a social trail. But if your group spreads out and each person is only treading on an individual patch of alpine tundra, it is resilient enough that it can bounce back from that. And so you're less likely to form a social trail if you spread out when you are off trail. Also, if you're on a talus-y area as pictured here, then choose the talus over alpine tundra, choose the talus over exposed dirt. That's a lot more durable, and it's going to help preserve the beauty of the space instead of causing erosion and breaking it down. Disposing of waste properly can be tricky with running because a lot of the calories we're ingesting are from little packets. Corners can sneak out of your pack pockets. So make sure that your pack or your clothes have secure pockets that you are putting your trash into, and that you can close that up. Make sure that those little pieces of micro trash are not escaping out of wherever you've put them. If you need to do your business in the backcountry, whether that's number one or number two, I highly recommend bringing a bag. If it's number two, outdoor stores sell specially prepped WAG bags that have neutralizing agents and toilet paper and little hand sani wipes that you can use. I know it's not the most wonderful idea of carrying your own waste around on your back, but it's a lot better than the idea of stepping in someone else's waste that is just lying out there in high alpine terrain. The alternative to that is you can dig a cat hole. You can also buy small trowels at any outdoor store. And then you want to, if you are in terrain where there's dirt and it's diggable, dig a hole that is at least 6 inches deep and bury that waste and make sure that it's not just lying on the surface and dispersing over the top of tundra. Leave what you find. So this can go into a number of things. Like if you find a heart-shaped rock, don't pick it up and put it in your pocket. Take a picture of it and take that to whoever you're wanting to send the heart to instead. This also ties in with respecting wildlife. Don't try to pick up the wildlife and take it home. Wildflower photos are just as beautiful as the wildflowers themselves. And then you don't need to take a pika home for your kids or your nieces or nephews. They are some of the cutest animals in existence, but they live where they live for a reason, which is that their resting body temperature is 104 degrees Fahrenheit. It's why climate change is such a huge threat to them. And you don't want to be traumatizing them by saying, oh, you're so cute. You also do not want to mess with mountain goats, or you're less likely to encounter bears, but mountain goats and moose you can encounter on these routes. Give them a wide berth, be respectful. Both of them can cause a whole lot of damage to humans. If you're running with dogs, this is why I recommend that you have them on a leash, regardless of whether that section of wilderness requires it or not, because especially goats and moose will perceive dogs as a threat. And if they have that visual that the dog is not able to come attack them, they're going to be less likely to mess with you. And then being considerate of other visitors. This is especially important on the most popular trails where you're likely to encounter hikers. The general rule of thumb is that the uphill party has the right of way. Some folks will grant lenience to runners going downhill because you're moving much faster, but the important thing is to be polite and be kind to the other trail users that you're encountering. So if you are going downhill and you've got people coming the other way and you are hoping that they will step aside, it's nice to say, hi, do you mind if I pass through? Give them a big smile. Don't act like you are entitled to have the whole trail just because you're moving faster. Same thing goes for if you come up on someone going the same direction you are and they're moving more slowly than you are. Again, like say hi, ask if you can pass through. Most people are going to be pretty pleasant and say yes, of course. But don't just come up and jump around somebody and scare them or piss them off because you're moving fast. Any questions on leave no trace? All right. So another piece of alpine safety is reading the clouds and preparing for the weather forecast adequately. As you probably know, in Colorado, we get summer monsoon, which is usually afternoon thunderstorms, but there is no set rule that says the thunderstorms are only going to happen after noon. I personally am not a huge fan of the be off the summit by noon rule because thunderstorms can show up at 9 a.m., 10 a.m. Sometimes they don't show up until 4 p.m. or at all. So having some basic knowledge of meteorology and what different clouds mean can be super, super valuable for alpine running because the forecast isn't always accurate, especially in the microclimates of specific mountain ranges. So stratus clouds are generally the flatter clouds mid-sky. They're not going to look like your storybook clouds. They're not like cotton balls. They're kind of wispy and flat. And usually they just mean that a change in the weather is coming sometime in the next couple days. They're not really much to worry about unless they are dark on the bottom, in which case it might rain, but it probably is not going to be a thunderstorm because electricity likes to have clouds with a little more height and volume to form. Cumulus clouds are our typical storybook clouds, the big cotton balls that put a smile on your face. But they're what you need to watch the most closely because they can change very, very fast, sometimes in 15 minutes or less. So if they are staying the same size, they're not really moving, they're not getting wider, they're not getting taller, that's fine. Keep an eye on them because again, if they do decide to change, they can turn into thunderheads in 15 minutes. So you want to make sure that if there's a forecast for thunderstorms and you've got cumulus clouds in the sky, you're keeping an eye on them, not just what's in front of you, but every part of the sky that you can see. That way you're not going to get caught unawares if you are running up to a summit and you get to the summit and suddenly on that side of the horizon, there's this huge dark cloud looming over you. When cumulus clouds do grow, they're going to do one of two things. Usually they're either going to get dark on the bottom, which could mean only rain, but it could mean some electricity as well, or they will start growing vertically and expanding into one another. And once they start doing that, that's cumulonimbus. That is a sure sign of an imminent thunderstorm, and you want to be back below tree line as soon as you possibly can. If you get used to reading the way these clouds shift, you had noticed before it turns into cumulonimbus and you are already long back below tree line or to your car by the time a cumulus cloud has turned into a thunderhead. All right, so I've included a couple of my favorite routes that are in the book in these last few slides. So we're going to start doing a little bit more Q&A for these slides before going into a full Q&A at the end. But for folks in Colorado, I've included one of my favorites from each range. So Mount Flora is in the Front Range. It is off of Berthoud Pass, and it is not super difficult, not one of the easiest routes either, but it is very picturesque. It's along the Continental Divide, and it just has really sweeping views. It's a broad, flat summit, and it gives you a little taste of everything. As you can see in the photo, there's a section of the route that is right along the edge of some cliffs, despite the fact that the other side of that single track is gentle, wide open alpine meadow. but it also has, right at the beginning from the summit of Berthoud Pass, some switchbacks and dirt road that go up a slope. It also has a variety of trail, from dirt trail to talus, and it's really, really gorgeous. And it's short enough that if you are watching the weather and you have clear sky in the evening, you can easily go and run it after work. You can also run it in the morning, or keep an eye on the clouds, run it midday if the clouds are not looking too threatening. But that's one of the great things about being able to read the clouds, is it opens up more times that you can go and run, because you're not going to be on trail nearly as long, and so you've got options that you can play with. Then in the Summit County area, because sharp-eyed folks will know that this is not in Summit County, it's in Lake County outside of Leadville, actually right on the border of Lake County and then verging over toward Fairplay. But Mount Sherman and Mount Sheridan, starting from Iowa Gulch outside of Leadville. And you can actually see the trailhead in the photo I've included here, even though it looks like the moon, because this photo was taken in late September when it's very dry, and you are starting above tree line here. It's short, it packs in a pretty significant chunk of vert in a short amount of space, but the chain of mountains around Iowa Gulch are all pretty mellow, pretty easy. It's a lot of talus, but you can easily link up far more peaks than just Sherman and Sheridan. And so if you've got a clear weather window of 4 or 5 hours, you can do a whole bunch of peaks in like 10 miles. But you can also just keep it to Mount Sherman or Mount Sheridan in 5 or less or 7 or less miles and have a nice quick outing from one of the highest towns in Colorado. Iowa Gulch is a very short drive from Leadville. Then we go to the Elk Range and the San Juan Range. So Electric Pass Peak and Leahy Peak are along the northern end of Cathedral Basin, which is a little bit south of Aspen. And this is a locals favorite that I'm really hoping the Aspen locals don't come for my head for sharing it in the book. It is bar none my favorite run in the entire guidebook. It's also the cover photo. And it has a little bit of everything. So there's a really lovely long approach that goes through aspen forest, and then along the bottom of some like avalanche chutes, so you can often see the signs of avalanches from the previous winter of downed trees on the sides of the trail, which is a very cool geological experience. Then there's a very steep set of switchbacks coming up into the upper basin. Cathedral Lake is absolutely gorgeous. It's like this gigantic gemstone, as many alpine lakes are in the base of the valley. And then you hit a long section of gentle switchbacks up to the saddle of Electric Pass, which is right around 13,000 feet. And this photo is taken from the summit of Electric Pass Peak, which is around 13,600 feet. But it's not super technical. It is all like very well built, mellow trail. And it's just got astonishing views for most of the summer. Those meadows that you can see in the photo have just a riot of wildflowers. And it just gives you a really good sense of the space where you are in, and you can feel the majesty of the mountains around you. One thing though, it is aptly named, so if there are clouds in the sky, if there is a thunderstorm forecast for the day, not only should you be wary about mountain running in general on those days, but Electric Pass Peak is named that for a reason. If there's electricity in the atmosphere, it will go to that peak. So don't go up there for funsies. You could get electrocuted if there's a thunderstorm in the forecast. Then moving down to the San Juans, I had to include Handy's Peak. It is a 14er. I prefer the route from Grizzly Gulch. That's what I included in the guidebook. It is also part of the Hard Rock 100 route most years. Those of you that watch ultra running will know that that race was just run, and Courtney Dauwalter and Kilian Jornet, the titans of the sport, won respectively for the men and women's fields. And Handy's also has gorgeous trail. Colorado 14ers Initiative has done a lot of trail work in that area to make sure that the trail is in great condition. And you've got sweeping views of all of the surrounding mountains in the San Juans. You're also going through a lot of high alpine meadows. And you're able to run a very, very significant chunk of this route, despite the fact that you've got nearly 4,000 feet of vertical gain over the course of 4 miles. So if you were to run one route down in the San Juans, I would highly recommend Handy's, but I did include a number of other runs from that same trailhead in the book because it's a great area, it's very runnable, and you can easily take a long weekend to check out a bunch of cool different spaces from the Grizzly Gulch trailhead. All right, moving to the Sangre de Cristo Range and Swatch Range. So the Phantom Terrace Loop is the closest you can get to true sky running without too much risk. There are more dramatic sky running-esque routes in the guidebook, but Phantom Terrace is not particularly dangerous. It's not as long as some of the other sky running type routes, and it's really, really gorgeous, super dramatic views while being on pretty stable terrain, either Lake Talus or high alpine meadows. And it takes you on a tour, essentially, of a couple different lakes, Comanche Lake and Venable Lake, as well as there's an alternative at the top of the route where you can choose to either stay on the Phantom Terrace Trail or you can go off trail and tag a couple of 13,000-foot peaks that are very close nearby. The Phantom Terrace itself is so named because on autumn days it can look rather spooky and it's very easy to imagine phantoms there. In the photo, it is on the other side of the second saddle pictured on the ridgeline, those red and silvery streaks of rock. It's a really special area of the state, and it's also quite easily accessible even with less four-wheelie type vehicles. It just always puts a smile on my face. The Sangres, more than anywhere else in Colorado, really resemble the Alps, and so it's easy to get a feel for that Alp-born mountain running, sky running vibe down in that range. And then for the Swatch Range, Mount Yale is one of the 14,000-foot peaks included from that range. There are 15 total 14ers in the Swatch Range, but I didn't include all of them in the guidebook, even though you could probably run all of them if you so chose. Some folks do. That's a whole nother barrel of fish we could get into. But Mount Yale is really gorgeous. It is one of the easiest to access by car. You don't need any sort of special vehicle to get to the trailhead. And then the lower sections of the Mount Yale Trail are the most similar to what you might find on the East Coast of the United States. It's really broadly spaced forest, wide trail, and then it gradually transitions into a more alpine type trail. Single track gets narrower. You get some nice steep switchbacks through the upper sections of forest as the views begin to open up. And then you come out into the gorgeous alpine tundra, have a couple of sections of like easier, mellower trail as long as you're keeping high feet in the rocks. And then you transition into full talus and get up to the summit ridge where it's more dramatic looking, but it's not high risk. So even though it's a narrow ridge and the trail is all rocks at that point, it's not dangerous. It's not going to pose the kind of risk that some of the more difficult routes in the book do. So it can be really great when you want a flavor of all of the different types of terrain that you can encounter in alpine spaces. All right. Now, with that said, I've got time for Q&A. I'm going to scroll through the chat here and see what has been popped in. So scrambling, if you are less familiar with that, is when you are on mountain terrain where you need to use one or both hands for a short section of terrain. It's not true climbing. You don't need to carry ropes for any of these routes, but it is a section where you probably will feel a lot more comfortable putting a hand down for balance or to help heave yourself up and over a section of the route. Only a couple of the routes in the book have mandatory scrambling on the route, one of which is Castle Peak in the Elks. There are a few sections there where you do need one or both hands to get up some steeper sections of rock. The photos for that steep section are in the book from above and below. And then the 10-mile traverse, which, as I said when I mentioned it before, if you are new to alpine running, save that route for last. It is one of the more technical routes in the entire state, and it is the most technical route in the book. My most frightening experience, trail/mountain running. Running specifically, probably close calls with weather. I haven't had very many because I am quite wary of electricity and clouds. But sometimes, especially when you are in a group, it can be interesting navigating the sky as well as the desires of the different folks in the group, whether they're wanting to summit or anything like that. And I have a 3 rumble rule that I don't like to use unless I absolutely have to. If I am up high and there are clouds in the sky that aren't nearby, if I hear 3 rumbles, then I'm out 3 strikes and I'm out. And I head back down regardless of whether I have summited something or not. I wouldn't push it that far if I were you, but when push comes to shove, that is my absolute of like, okay, I can't stall any longer. I have to go down for my safety. I haven't really had any sketchy animal encounters when I've been in the alpine. Most of my animal encounters are the fun kind of like seeing pika very close by or having ravens flying around or landing nearby and saying hello. You often see a lot more mountain goats when you are running at like slightly different hours than you might necessarily be hiking. But other than that, I haven't really had any like unusual or scary animal encounters. Best run to try for people who are new to trail running. I'm going to list two. One is in the Front Range and one is in the Elk Range, because they are a little bit lower elevation and they're pretty mellow. So they're not going to like be too much exertion if you're not used to high elevation. In the Front Range, Mitchell Lake and Blue Lake are from the Brainerd Lake Trailhead in the Indian Peaks Wilderness. You do have to get a timed entry permit to access that trailhead these days, but it's a gorgeous, gorgeous trail. The lower sections are through forest, and then you pop out just above tree line to Blue Lake, which is below several 12,000 and 13,000 foot peaks. And it's just a really gorgeous area, really nice, mellow trail. It's not too challenging. So that would be a really great intro in the Front Range. In the Elk Range, I'm a big fan of Midway Tarn, which is another local's favorite that I'm hoping people won't get mad at me for sharing. But it's not very long. And then it also, even though it gains a fair amount of vertical in a short distance, it has very, very well built trail, beautifully graded and maintained switchbacks. So the entire route is runnable, because the switchbacks make it so that it's not too steep to maintain a running gait. Any other questions?
Thank you so much, Annalise. That was so informative. It was really fun to hear you talk about all of those topics. I did have one question or a couple of last questions for myself. One is, how did you originally get into trail running? And were you first a road runner who got into trail running, or were you more of a hiker who got into trail running?
Oh, there are different ways that I can answer that question. I first got into mountain running when I was a teenager. I was a competitive cross country skier through pretty much all of middle and high school. But growing up in the Elks Range and being lucky enough to have some former Olympians as coaches, during summer training, they really liked to push our boundaries and encourage us to get out into different areas and different sports, including mountain biking, which absolutely did not stick for me, although I understand why a lot of folks love it. But also, we would run trails in the Aspen and Roaring Fork Valley. And usually, at least once a summer, we would run a peak. So the first peak I ever stood on top of is Electric Pass Peak. It's the first time I ever ran at that elevation. And I think that's part of why I love it so much. There's that magic from when I was about 15 years old that will always be written in my brain. So that was my first introduction to alpine running specifically. Running in general, I started running in middle school doing like Susan G. Komen 5Ks, and then ran cross country. But as an adult, I got super into the 14ers. I am a very big hiking enthusiast, and I don't have the highest risk tolerance in the world. A lot of folks, when they get really into the 14ers, will head more in the direction of like rock climbing or like more extreme mountaineering, where you're taking on pretty high levels of objective hazard and risk. I have done mountaineering and will continue to, but I don't like the higher risk things as much as some of my friends do. And with a running background, alpine running is a really great way to push yourself in the outdoors without taking on the level of objective hazard and objective risk that you would if you were doing like technical alpine climbs in Rocky Mountain National Park, or if you are the type of person that likes to do the Bells Traverse every other weekend in the summer. Those are still great things to do, but alpine running is a little bit lower risk than those other backcountry activities. So as an adult, I did come to it from hiking as an outlet for pushing myself without getting into too sketchy of situations.
Great. Do we have any last questions? So you did a lot of exploring. I guess I have one more question. You did a lot of exploring for the book, a lot of runs. Any favorite memories from making the book or doing the trail runs for the book?
I mean, it's hard to choose just one or two. I mean, one of the really great things about doing the research for this book was getting to talk to other folks and get to know folks in the outdoor community and check out routes that were new to me, especially being someone that is very oriented toward peaks. I don't like the term peak bagger, even though I technically fall into that category. But getting to check out some of the lake routes was really special because those more mellow sections of terrain around alpine lakes are really spectacularly gorgeous. There's just something about water and wildflowers in high alpine spaces that just pulls at your heartstrings. And so getting to explore those areas that were new to me that I might not have necessarily gone to if I were only hiking was really, really cool. And I'm looking forward to continuing to do that as I explore not just Colorado, but other areas of backcountry. I see Anna, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. You've raised your hand.
Yes, I had a last minute question actually. Can you hear me and see me okay?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, yeah, I was just wondering how long did you work on the book and how did you get the idea of getting this book together, putting this book together?
Well, I worked on the book from start to finish for a total of 3 years. But that was extended by a year because of the pandemic. So if COVID had never happened, this book would have come out last year, but the Colorado Mountain Club had to postpone all of their titles in production by a year when COVID hit. So the good news about that for my book, for Colorado Alpine Trail Runs, is that we have 5 extra routes that would not have been in there if the pandemic did not happen. And then can you repeat the second part of your question?
Yeah, how did you get the idea of
really it was kind of the synergy of different interests that I have. I've been inclined toward writing my entire life. And when I was just hiking in alpine spaces, the running background I had from my teenage years and childhood was kind of pinging in my brain. So like the first time I hiked Mount Bierstadt, there's this little voice going in my head of like, this is a really nice trail. This would be super fun to run. And then obviously I knew that that was possible for other routes like Electric Pass Peak. And so that idea started bouncing around my head back in probably 2014 or so. And then ended up like talking with some friends about that idea on a hike. And some of them know the Colorado Mountain Club even better than I do and said, you know what, you should write a proposal. That's a really great idea. And here we are.
Cool, thank you.
So the COVID delay created new trails to write about because the trails themselves existed, but I had a lot of the research for the other 40 trails done already. And so it was basically a way to fill up the time by exploring more trails and figuring out trails that would fit well with the book, that wouldn't necessarily fit as well, but was just something that worked out well, of like a lot of the work was already prepared for. And so having an extra summer of time, trail running is something that's very easy to do by yourself without being exposed to other humans. So it's a great pandemic activity. If you're comfortable running by yourself, it's pretty safe to do so. Any other final questions?
Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. I did the drawing here, and the winner of our CMC buff is Allison Spain. Allison, I'll be sending this to you in the mail tomorrow, so enjoy. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. And we'll see you out on the trails.
Thanks all for all your questions. I really enjoyed sharing the book with you tonight.